Hi, I'm Pete, and welcome to Just a Few Acres Farm. This is Small Farm Sunday, where I cover topics of interest mainly to small farmers, but I think this one touches on a lot of people, actually touches on everybody. If you eat food, this video is important to you. A while back, I got a viewer comment, and they said, well, what do you think the future of farming is? And I've been thinking about it ever since. And I'm afraid that the way I farm is on the losing end of history as far as farming goes. Yes, a lot of farms have operated like we do for a long time through history, but there's a lot of factors coming together that I think are really spelling the demise of the small farm for the most part. And I want to get into those factors first. Before I do that, let's have a little fun with the pigs, because there were a lot of questions about black walnuts in the last video, and will the pigs eat them? The answer is yes, the pigs do eat them. I don't think it's their preferred food, but when they're looking for something to do, they'll crunch those walnut shells right down to nothing, and they even eat this nasty green husk. I don't think it's as good as acorn finishing pigs, but we have a heck of a lot of walnuts, and they eat a heck of a lot of walnuts. Heck, a lot of these are walnut trees that are in their pen. So yes, the pigs do eat them. In fact, I'm just going to dump this in here. There you go, guys. I don't think I knocked anybody's socks off when I said that small farms are becoming fewer and fewer. That's been the trend for at least 4 decades. There's really 3 things that have led to fewer and fewer small farms, and they're all related to efficiency, because in our society, cheaper and faster, not necessarily better, is the way that food is gone. These factors are, number 1, just the advance of technology and mechanization. Since the tractor was invented, it's steadily gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, and you want a bigger piece of land to work with that equipment so that you can farm more efficiently with bigger implements. So that leads to the second thing, and that is that small farms have conglomerated into big farms. It's harder and harder to make a living on a small acreage because commodity prices keep going down. So small farms go under, they get eaten up by bigger and bigger farms. Heck, this is the way of America. Everything works this way. This is the reason why companies like Walmart and Amazon are eating up all of the little guys. And the third thing is vertical integration, which has proven to be a very efficient model in the livestock world. It first happened, as far as I know, with chicken, and then it happened with pork. So vertical integration is when a single company controls the whole process, from the birth of the animal through the growing of the feed to the animal and the butcher of the animal and onto the supermarket shelf. By putting it all under one corporate umbrella, they can save the money that the middlemen would make. So when I was a kid growing up here, there was such a thing as an independent poultry farm, and there were even pig farms that would grow thousands of head of pigs and then sell them to the butchering industry. That really doesn't exist at any scale anymore. It's owned by the parent company, and the farmer's kind of like a serf. They exist at the whim of the parent company, often taking all the risk while the parent company reaps all the rewards. There's several documentaries, particularly on the poultry business, that show how this all works. The beef industry is the one big meat industry that has yet to suffer from vertical integration. It still exists is, I guess, an inefficient process of mostly breeders breeding calves to weaning age, and then they either go to a stocker farm where they graze and grow, and then to a finishing yard where they're finished out on grain and silage and kind of a total ration, or they go directly from the farmer who calves and weans to the corporation. Well, there's all kinds of examples out there of how the farms that are actually birthing the calves and bringing them to wean are really getting robbed more and more by the couple big companies that will buy up these calves and send them through the rest of the system. I think those companies would like to take control of the whole thing, just like in pork and poultry. Take the calves from birth all the way through the supermarket shelf and capture more of that profit under their umbrella. I think it's only a matter of time. I can hear the crunching of walnuts in the background. Pigs have amazingly strong jaws. If you've ever tried to crack a black walnut, it takes a lot of force, but they do it. To complete the picture of where we're at and what the kind of trends are, we need to talk about commodity crops a little bit. And these are things like corn and soybeans and wheat. The system is really screwy now. Take the example of number 2, field corn. We're growing a heck of a lot more corn than we need these days. And the reason is because, well, government policy is part of it. Going back to the 70s, it really sort of short-circuited the supply-demand mechanism, the supply-demand pricing mechanism. The other thing is that corn and soybeans have become industrial materials. So it's not like all the corn that's grown is being grown to feed to us or to cattle or any other animal. It's being broken apart into its separate components and being made into things like high fructose corn syrup, ethanol. It's become another resource, like something you would mine out of the ground, coal. It gets turned into other things, and it's become so obscure from how it's related to our direct food supply and a healthy food supply that it's hard to tease apart, you know, how much of these things we actually need versus how much we grow anymore, because we use them for so many other things. So putting all 3 of these factors together, more and bigger mechanization, remember, vertical integration, and conglomeration of smaller farms into bigger farms, what does that tell us about farming's future? Well, it tells me that the trend is certainly not in my favor, and probably that those trends are going to continue over at least the next 30 years. I don't know what the ultimate future is. Maybe we'll be growing everything in labs. You know, that seems to be the underlying theme. But I think these things are going to continue to the point where we have driverless tractors. They're almost driverless now with GPS and auto steer, but I could certainly see farming being fully automated and that going on. I can see continuing vertical integration, and it seems like the concentration is just into fewer and fewer corporations. I can certainly see that coming with the beef industry. And I see, unfortunately for me, less and less consumption of meat, particularly red meat like beef and pork. I've seen it over the years that I've been farming, and there's lots of reasons behind it. I mean, the doctors are all telling us we need to eat less meat. Well, most of them are anyway. The environmentalists are telling us we need to eat less meat for its effect on climate change. There's just so many forces that are much bigger than any of us at work here. That's the trend. I think it's going to continue. I think that some small farms will continue to flourish based on just looking back through history, as with all these trends. So if we look back through history, small farms first disappeared, I believe, out in the Midwest, where particularly commodity crop farming conglomerated and got bigger and bigger into bigger farms because of efficiencies in equipment size and also government policy. The fence row to fence row, plant it all and drive the commodity prices down, first to compete with the Russians, I think, and then to ensure cheap food for everybody. After that trend started in the Midwest on the really good cropland, it spread throughout the rest of the U.S. And here in the East, we see as the trend small farms disappearing because of vertically integrated pork and poultry, and also the dairy industry being conglomerated as milk prices have been driven down compared to inflation, and even driven down aside from inflation. The bigger and bigger dairies have been able to weather those low price troughs in the milk system. So that's what we've seen around here. CAFO dairies picking up small farms, using them for the land only, knocking down all the buildings on the farms. You turkeys are loud. So where does all this leave the small farms? And by small farm, I'm kind of defining it as the sort of size that's been around for generations now. And I would say that's a couple hundred acres or less, maybe a little more than a couple hundred acres. They tend to sell local, they tend to sell direct to consumer, they tend to sell a diversity of products. I think it leaves us in the alternative, not in the mainstream. We're not about that trend to drive food cheaper and get bigger. We're about serving niche markets, and I think that those markets fall into really three groups. Number one, you have the people that are concerned about the environmental and social aspects of the commercialization of farming, and I classify those usually as the college-educated folks, but it's not only the college-educated folks. There are lots of people that are concerned about the trends in our food production. The second group are opposed to the methods of food production for philosophical reasons, be it religion, be it just their basic belief system and how the land should be treated. So that's group number two. The third group is concerned about quality. They're the foodies, and they're the ones that come to buy something that's a cut above the supermarket. I think that small farms will continue to exist because these three populations aren't going away. In fact, some of them I think are getting bigger and bigger, like the philosophically opposed groups. And as far as geography goes, these small farms are going to be most successful where these sorts of people are concentrated. And like it or not, it's around cities because that's where you get the concentrations of these folks for the most part. And I don't think it's anything particularly to do with cities. It's just that most people live in cities now. So the most successful small farms are kind of gravitating a lot along the East Coast, a lot into the West Coast, down into the South where you have those urban centers that are predominant. And the other group that I haven't mentioned till yet is the homesteading movement. These are folks that have decided to kind of exit the mainstream system entirely for various reasons, philosophical, religious, all kinds of things, and they're providing for themselves. They're kind of they're like the, you know, the kissing cousin of the local small farm movement because they're practicing a lot of the same methods and have a lot of the same beliefs. In summary, using my crystal ball to look, if I was to go out 30 years, I just see an ever widening divide between the mainstream and the alternative, with the mainstream getting ever efficient and bigger and more mechanized and collected under a smaller group of corporate control, while the alternative continues to go this way, becoming more independent and becoming a completely different model than this guy over here. I think it's unfortunate, but at least it provides a place for people who want to go either way, right? At least both options still exist. Even though I'll acknowledge this pattern, I think it's a real shame. And there's some things about this trend that I will fight for and have fought for a lot. And the first is that we're divorcing ourselves from the way nature works by depending on fewer and fewer people to produce our food. It used to be that a lot of people knew how to plant a seed, grow a plant, raise an animal. Fewer and fewer do. I think that it hurts our psychology, just like when I'm standing out there in the pasture with the cows and talk about how peaceful that is. There's lots of people missing that now who used to experience. I think they're becoming ungrounded, not only adrift in place because they're not tied to place by the production of the land, but their psychology is adrift because they don't have that basic connection to nature that we all need to ground ourselves in. Those are the things that are most important to me about small farming. And by becoming more and more divorced from the land, less people understand the impact of their actions on their environment and on the land, and I think this is a shame. Just natural processes like growth and decay, people don't understand the first thing of when they haven't been raised to see those processes at work. So the choices they make as consumers, they don't understand their impact on the environment. They just allow somebody to tell them what the impact is and they take it from there. When I was an architect and I was focused on sustainable design, one of my jobs was future casting, and that is taking a look at what buildings were going to be like going forward. And I had a mindset about making less resource intensive buildings is kind of the driver for all that. And one of the things I came up was what I called the riveted future, and that is if you look at a science fiction movie or a book from the 30s, they extended the future based on the technology of the present. So everything, all the steel was riveted together back then, and the spaceships in the future were all riveted together. There's things that happen in technology that you can't predict in development, and also all kinds of outside factors as well that make futures take a right turn past what you ever expected they would be. And some examples of right turns are things like the computer. The computer changed everything. You don't see anything remotely like that. Even in the science fiction movies of the 50s, they're nothing like what we have today. The digital revolution has changed everything in our lives. So what may come along that could change the future of food production and farming in the near future? Well, the first thing I think of is resource scarcity, be it fossil fuels, precious minerals, minerals that are in short supply. Those things, who knows? You know, they exist in fixed quantities. How far we are from exhausting them, I don't know. But it could be an issue. We are seeing it with shortages now. I don't know if it's related to scarcity or more to COVID, but that is a factor. The second issue is the changing climate. The climate could be so drastically affected out west, it could change the entire ball game. We don't know. The third is the availability of fresh water. As we all know, the aquifers are going down and down in the west, and they're not being replenished. That's the nature of that aquifer. It's a stored pool of water. What happens as that gets lower and lower? That could really change agriculture drastically. The final big unknown that's really related to all the previous ones is the fragility of these giant systems we've built that are built to be as efficient as they can be with a given set of circumstances. And when the circumstances change, like what happened with COVID, these big systems easily fail. It failed all over the place. Look at material prices. Look at what happened to the butchering system. When you have control of a big system umbrellaed under a few companies, that system is prone to failure. When you have a whole bunch of thousands and thousands and thousands of small farms making up that system, and 1 or 2 or 100 farms wink out for a little while, it doesn't shatter the whole system. So any of those things that I mentioned, water scarcity, climate change, resource scarcity, can bring that whole system crashing down and bring small farms back up to the level that they were prior to this. But it requires kind of a regression in terms of the trend of development so far. A lot of circumstances that are kind of far-fetched would have to come together to make any of these things happen. There's a lot there to think on, and again, I'm only guessing, but based on trends, like I've said, I see this continuing to happen. And it's unfortunate because a lot of things exist as a duality in our society today, and I've talked so many times about how I feel like we need to kind of try and heal that duality, but with future farming, I just see it continuing. The nice thing about the whole thing, to leave this on a positive note, is we kind of have our bases covered. In other words, if there is some kind of a massive failure in these huge systems, we have a small farm system that is kind of acting in reserve kind of now. I mean, it's to the people who depend on them, it's certainly not acting in reserve, but if these farms had to kind of scale up in quantity, they could do that. That can still happen. So, I hope you have a great Sunday. Oh, and for all my viewers in Canada, I wish you the best Thanksgiving. That is this weekend, and I'll see you next time.